You are listening to Talking Images, the official podcast of icmforum.com.
Welcome back, everyone. I'm Chris, and in this episode, we are talking about originality. It seems to mean something. People talk as if they want it, but does it even exist? Look at the box office. Sequel, and then with the occasional adaptation and remake thrown into the mix. Is Hollywood, as so many claim, out of ideas? We are so starved, it seems, for what we call originality, or original content, that we now shout from the rooftops when biopics and huge toy brands suddenly carve their way into the landscape. But is someone adapting a Wikipedia article with a bit of flash and sex really all we want? And if not, what is this originality we are craving? What does originality look like in the 21st century? Is it just a few tweaks on a familiar formula? Perhaps a gender swap? Maybe the 197th contemporary take on Shakespeare with guns? And are non-adapted so-called original screenplays really any more original than anything else? Could it be that every story, to some extent or another, has been played out, that narrative structures are set, that technical abilities always copy on what's been there before, and that any idea, no matter how fresh or different, will always resemble previous works, if not in cinema, in some other art? Can my panel here actually think of any film from, say, the last decade that they would call truly original? Hell, can I think of any film that they can call truly original? Could it be that Lumiere brothers were the last original filmmakers? Let's find out. Oh, and if we really are strapped for ideas and we can't name a single film, does originality actually matter at all? That's also the perfect time to bring in my two co-hosts. And I want to start with you today, Saul, as your thesis is essentially that nothing is original. Do you care to explain that to us a little bit?
Yeah, hi, Chris. I am a believer of nothing is original in the way that I don't think we as human beings are really capable of original thought. We're always inspired, even from a very young age, by things around us, things that we take in and we process. And I think a lot of filmmakers, even if they don't realize it consciously, actually are influenced by other works. All you have to do is look at somebody like Duncan Jones when he was doing press conferences for his 2009 film Moon. He kept denying the influence of 2001: A Space Odyssey and kept insisting that his film was more inspired by Silent Running and Alien. But of course, the film resembles 2001: A Space Odyssey far more. So I think even though maybe he wasn't actively looking to do a Kubrick homage, he ended up creating something which was quite similar in a way to 2001: A Space Odyssey. So that's just one example. But look, I think in general, it's impossible to deny the influences that are out there. The only thoughts we're capable of generating are thoughts that are based on things around us. So I'd say that originality doesn't exist. The concept is overrated. And the title that I suggested for this podcast, I don't know if we end up using, but the title I suggested was, is lack of originality a problem or a fascinating challenge to modern filmmakers? Because I think it's the challenge. The challenge is trying to make your work seem original, even when there's no possible way that it can be.
All right, Saul. We're happy to have Niels back here for his second ever recording session with us, as he holds a bit of a different viewpoint. So, Niels, care to elaborate on what that is and how far apart you are from Saul.
I think I get where Saul is coming from, but I also think that it's kind of weird to put a definition on a word that renders the word obsolete. There are different ways to define what originality is, and if you're going with a definition that says, okay, it does not exist, there's really no reason for the words to exist, and so there must be a definition for that word that kind of makes sense to what people are talking about. Saul's perspective, I've used it before too in arguments, because as a genre fan, you often come across people who dismiss an entire genre or niche, and they say like, okay, it's not original. I don't like slasher films because, they're always the same. And then, as a counter argument, you can say, yeah, but nothing is original. If I learned one thing joining ICM, it's that indeed, even a genre like experimental film, it's based on a lot of cliches and returning themes and returning structures. So from that point of view, I agree that nothing is original, only it's a counter argument that's using someone's yardstick against them. As a concept itself, it doesn't make too much sense to say that nothing is original.
Quite the counter there, Niels. And Saul wrote in the chat here to check the dictionaries. I opened up a few. So Merriam-Webster defines originality as the quality or state of being original, which is not very helpful at all. And then there's the second definition, is freshness of aspect, design, or style. And the third is the power of independent thought or constructive imagination, which is nothing of what I thought originality would necessarily mean. So if I click on to original, rather than just originality, number one is of relating to or constituting an origin or beginning, again, wasteful. 2, not secondary, derivative, or imitative. All right, fair enough. Now we're getting somewhere. And there's a 2b, being the first instance or source from which a copy, reproduction, or translation is or can be made. Fair enough. And the third is independent and creative in thought or action. Lovely. So we get some words here. We get inventive. We get not derivative. Inventive is pretty easy. Derivative, let's see. So in this episode, I think I'll line myself up a little bit more with Niels in the sense that I do agree. If originality is meaningless, if nothing can be original, then there's no reason to have that word. So that word should mean something. And my view on originality and what it means in cinema is that for something to be original, it doesn't have to be absolutely unique. We're not talking about unique. Unique and original are two different things. I'm sure you can find a film you could call quote unquote unique. I mean, maybe John Dillman, for instance, is unique. I can't think of another 4-hour film about a woman cutting vegetables and living her life day to day. Maybe there's some shorter films like that, sure. But the question of originality really comes to me is like, is there some kind of fresh or inventive thing you can add? Something new, something that hasn't been done before? And I think at this point, when I use the word original, I probably have a much lower standard for how I use it than Saul. I mean, I can think a gimmick is original. A twist on a very familiar story, just turning something around can be original and fresh. So let's dive into that a little bit then. And my next question will therefore have to be to Niels. Since you believe originality actually exists, what does originality look like today? Like, what is something that you would consider original?
For me, originality doesn't have to be one aspect of a film. It can be like a combination of aspects put together to create something new and unique, something that to me feels fresh. So in my definition, it's already a bit subjective because it has to be fresh for me. That means that if something prior to that existed that is very similar and I haven't seen it yet, I will still experience the film I'm watching now as original, even though it got its sources from elsewhere. So, for example, I watched the film yesterday. It's called Extraneous Matter. Its sources are kind of clear, but then putting them together creates something very unique. It's on the one hand a story about one of those tentacle monsters from the 80s anime, So it's very genre, very weird, very niche. But then it is presented in a way that is very art house. So it's like a more squarish aspect ratio. It's black and white, it's very stylish, a very quirky but jazzy score. And then if you combine those two together, you're watching something that the sources are clear and the sources are obvious, but combining them, it's something entirely new and fresh. And then for me, that is really what originality is. Finding those combinations that create something new out of something that already exists.
What's your take on that, Sol?
I do like the definition that Niels comes up with, that something that's original, something that's new and unique. Although I'd probably just added something that's perceived as new and unique. That's really where the word original gets floated around. But look, even though I don't really believe in originality per se, I don't think that's a bad thing. Like Niels used the example of the slasher genre. I'm a big slasher fan, and I don't mind that I watch slashers that are similar to each other, as long as they can give me like a really powerful audio-visual sensation while watching it. It doesn't really matter to me if it's something where I can see a few different things that I've seen before elsewhere. So originality maybe doesn't matter to me, is maybe more where I'm coming from. But at the risk of this turning into a dictionary episode, which I think it almost is, Chris reading the dictionary, very entertaining, I just want to point out that even if originality doesn't exist, it's the concept of it, which is why the word is there. Like utopia doesn't exist, but utopia is something that people strive for. People strive for originality, even if it may or may not be possible. Originality, it's just anything which I guess I feel is fairly new and unique, something which I don't feel I've seen done quite like that before. I can't come up with many examples of that these days outside of experimental cinema. That's actually the one realm where I'm still finding new stuff, sort of challenges to me what a film can be. But in terms of narrative and documentary cinema, yeah, there isn't a lot out there that I could say really feels to me completely new and unique. Just some things which to me maybe seem mostly new and unique.
Ooh, so Saul actually has some examples of films where he actually thought, wow, that's original. Is that true, Saul? I had a question for later. We're going to start naming films we thought were original, but maybe we should move that up now, because now I'm really, really intrigued. Like you said, in experimental films, you actually have seen some films you would say, yes, that's original. What are they?
That's a question that's caught me off guard. There are some films that I was thinking about in preparation for this podcast. There are a few narrative and a few documentary ones, which I'd say I guess I would call original, because prior to that I haven't seen anything done quite like it. But in terms of experimental cinema, I guess the most obvious example, because we did a whole podcast on him, is Michael Snow. Things like Corpus Callosum and the way it changes our perception of what actually is happening within the film. To me, that's very original. Even Presents, or Presents, depending how you pronounce it, which was dug up Realms of Obscurity after his passing towards the beginning of last year. That's a film that to me feels very original. Or Ramu's Nephew, pretty much, I guess all their Snow's features to me do feel very original with what they're doing. But it's not just like Michael Snow. You've got things like Kindling from Stan Brakhage. That to me is very original with what he's doing in there. And I guess just other experimental shorts. Not really things I can think of offhand, because I didn't make a list of offhand, but experimental cinema, when you're sort of being a checker on ICM and just like checking off random things on the anthology archives list or stuff like that, you do occasionally come across something which you go, oh, I haven't seen anything like that before. But I don't really see it that much these days in narrative and documentary cinema.
And with that, I think the episode is over. Saul has considered that something is original, so there's no reason to continue.
I've just contradicted myself. No, I did actually say earlier on, like perception of something being that you perceive to be new and unique. So I'm not saying that Corpus Callosum is necessarily original. What I would say is, based on what I've seen, to me it comes across as incredibly new and unique. It's not completely new and unique, but I guess it's refreshing enough that I guess I would consider it to be fairly original. But no, I wouldn't consider, I guess, anything at all, even the best Michael Snow films, to be completely original. It's like utopia. You can get environments which are utopian, but they're not going to be complete utopia. You're not going to ever get at something which is completely original. maybe the episode should be called Originality is Overrated, because I guess that's more the stance I'm coming from. But yeah, I don't know if it can be completely achieved. I don't know the films that Michael Snow saw during his lifetime, although those would be incredibly interesting to watch to see the influences.
Okay, then now we're getting a bit closer to a neutral ground, I guess, where all of us are kind of saying that there is something that is original to some point, and we can talk together. And on that topic, so you say originality is overrated, and that fits in very well with my planned question narrative here. So, do we actually need originality? Like, there seems to be this craving for it, like I said in my intro. Like, people are decrying the lack of originality. You hear it everywhere on social media, publications. It seems to be a genuine issue. Now, Saul doesn't care. He thinks that it's completely overrated. But what about you, Niels? Like, do you think that we have some kind of craving for originality, and is it justified?
I think it really depends on what you're looking for in cinema or art in general. I think there's a group of people who want familiarity. It's kind of a blanket of comfort for them. They aren't looking for originality. There are other people who want to experience something new, to be inspired, to peer into the mind of someone who thinks differently. For those people, originality is like a very strong asset to a film. So for me, I am a genre fan. I like genre films, but a well-executed genre film, for me, it will never be more than an 8 out of 10. Because it lacks something there, because I've seen it all before, and even when done well, there's kind of a limitation to how much I can enjoy it and how much it inspires me. Now, if you put something original there, something that I haven't seen before, something that inspires me, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a plot or an idea or a theme. Even on a technical level, the visuals, the vibes, the music, just put something there that is new to me, that surprises me. And then for me, it's a very important aspect of why I watch cinema or why I explore art in general, just to get that little bit of energy from watching something new, something that I couldn't come up with, something I haven't seen before.
Do you like to be surprised in films, Saul?
I definitely do like to be surprised in films. The best sort of film for me is a film where I enter it blank. I enter most films as blank as possible, and where I'm not able to guess where it's heading. So that to me is a really good thing. But even when it does head in directions, I wouldn't say necessarily original, but didn't really need to even ask me the question. I don't think we need originality, but I think surprises are good. I do like films that sort of play against expectations, and films that enter them, you're not sure where it's going, or it goes in a completely different direction to what you think it's going. And so I love that surprise factor. I love it when films can do it for you. I love it when letterbox reviews do not spoil the fact that there'll be a surprise turn in a film. Having a surprise in a film and not expecting it, that's like one of the best things you can get. It's not necessarily a hallmark of originality, but it's a hallmark of creativity, which to me is something different.
Yeah, I guess we're diving here into, again, the dictionary definitions between creative and original, because the two are definitely linked as per the dictionary, but obviously they're two different words, so let's not get too pedantic. In my view, I do think that there is a reasonable drive for originality or surprises, or for a medium to change in some ways. I mean, some of my favorite directors, I mean, we've had 2 episodes on Godard so far, and Godard's whole view is that he didn't want to do what other people had done before. In fact, I watched the documentary Godard Cinema just this morning, and there were interviews with his old collaborators who were exasperated because they would be filming a scene, and he would be asking them, how would Renoir shoot this? And the cameraman would say, oh, he would hand in the camera, and then someone would enter the frame and leave the other side. And he would ask, what would Lang do? What would XYZ director do? And then he said, okay, can we do the exact opposite of that? And the cameraman would just get really exasperated of having to find, like, for almost every single shot, every single day, would have to find, okay, what's the opposite of what these other people did before? You can say as well, doing the opposite of someone else is also not necessarily quote unquote original in the most obvious sense, because it's just like, I see Niels writing in there, negative inspiration. It's like, I see this, I want to do the complete opposite of it. But obviously the opposite of something that exists, if it hasn't existed before, is new, it's original, but it's still based on something else. What are your guys' thoughts on that?
Negative inspiration is something that is often overlooked. People think as inspiration as something that is kind of an admiration of the original, where I think it's often you see something and then you think, I can do it better, or okay, so the opposite could be more interesting. Or it's a sort of inspiration, but it doesn't have to be a homage or an inspiration or an admiration of something that you've seen before. One thing I'd like to add to that, because you say if you create something, then the opposite of that is kind of instantly created too. It's a bit more philosophical maybe, but there's the story of the monkeys and the typewriters. If given enough time, one of the monkeys will eventually write a Shakespeare novel, kind of a thought experiment. If you expand on that, then if even more monkeys and even more time, they will have written every story that could ever been written down. And it's a kind of simple and stupid experiment, because monkeys and typewriters, they don't exist. But now that we have computers and we can generate what AI is doing these days, we can generate everything possibly in existence, especially when computational power is increased. I think that we can come to a point where every story indeed could be fabricated by a computer and nothing is in fact original anymore, because it will effectively exist. So I don't know what that means or how it relates specifically to originality or what the consequences are. It's an interesting aspect to think about, how the future of originality will look like when you can effectively generate everything that could possibly exist.
Yeah, it's true. And I think one of the main things that people are saying about AI is that it can't create anything original, which is why we still need artists. But in this episode, we're saying that essentially everything builds on something else anyways. And I think Saul's view is that humans aren't actually able to perceive originality. They can only build on what else has been done, or they can, counter-react to what exists already. At which point, human intelligence and AI, in Saul's view, I suppose, is pretty similar. Is that your view, Saul?
I wouldn't say that AI and human intelligence are the same, but I guess we operate similarly to AI. That's why it's called artificial intelligence. So it's still based on intelligence, and I guess that's what intelligence is: gathering information from different sources and putting things together. I guess it's similar what AI can do compared to what a human mind can do. But for me, I guess that's just what makes originality, or trying to achieve originality, such a fascinating challenge, that you've got filmmakers who are trying to do things like negative inspiration and try and twist different formulas around just in order to try and get something that feels fresh. And okay, I've lost my train of thought there. Yeah. Okay, if I was an AI, I wouldn't lose my train of thought. So that's something to strive for later.
Yeah, I guess the fact that we're a bit more analog than AI, if you want, gives us the ability to have different kinds of happy accidents. And I mean, there's lots of accidents with AI too, but I'm not sure if it will be enjoyed or understood the same way, or there must be some kind of distinction there. Let's just say that and get back on track. To finish my thought on Godard, I think one of the things that always remained to his work was that he always wanted to do something different. He always wanted to see what else cinema could be. He was one of the first people who experimented with video recording and making TV equipment essentially more cinematic. He always wanted to go for what was next. He didn't want to rest on what was. I do think that there is a drive, for a lot of us at least, that we want to see something new. We want to see something different. So I don't think that the call for originality is superfluous. But I do think that what a lot of people call originality isn't really that original. It's usually just small tweaks on formulas. There's not a big difference between a well-made remake and a well-made original quote-unquote screenplay. They can both be equally original and fascinating based on just how they tweaked the screenplay and how they shot it, the performances involved. You can make really interesting films. I mean, the Thing is a remake, Scarface is a remake. They feel completely different from the original films, and I do think that originality in that sense is indeed overrated. You can take the exact same building blocks everyone else has done, everyone else has used, and still make something absolutely fantastic with it. I mean, so many of the best regarded films of all time are adaptations of books, etc. It doesn't have to be original to be special and to be fantastic. So in that sense, I do think originality is overrated, and I will agree with Sol, but I also think that it's something special to see something new. It doesn't even have to be the first film to do it, but you get these films that kind of explode into the popular imagination, and cinema suddenly is not quite what it was. To speak about Jean-Luc Godard, for instance, you had Breathless and the new wave in general too, but suddenly films wanted to be on the street. They wanted to be more free-flowing. They wanted to mix more with editing. Now, obviously, the jump cuts that Godard used, they were from I Am Negro by John Rauch. From a couple of years earlier, he saw it there and he really liked it and incorporated it into his film. But that was kind of like the explosive moment. We have similar moments where completely new genres essentially are born, like found footage. Like we had an episode of found footage. We talked about how the first found footage film is actually from 1961. It had most of the, or at least quite a few of the tropes. It's called The Connection. It's actually one of the best ones. But then you had Blair Witch Project, which just exploded and essentially created a new subgenre that lasted for well over a decade. So I'll turn to you first, Sol. Like when you have these moments that kind of just change cinema, create a new subgenre, etc. Like, how would you define those kinds of works, if not original?
That's quite easy. They're just works that are perceived as being original. Yeah, I don't know if I can even really expand on that more. I mean, Blair Witch with found footage would be the obvious example. Found footage existed for at least 38 years beforehand, but that was considered still to be a turning point film, was still considered to be very original when it came out. The Matrix, which I'm sure we'll go on to later on, also in the podcast, considered very original when it came out, even though it overshot Dark City by a year, and even though it's pretty much the same idea that Fassbinder came up with World on a Wire. I mean, even films like Wolf of Wall Street, that's probably one of the most influential films of the past 12 years. There's been a lot of films that are trying to like sort of copycat that or build on that sort of formula of like egomania and extreme wealth, everything from like The Big Short to Dumb Money, which came out recently, trying to sort of like get onto that formula. That for me is just, again, like the perceived originality of what Scorsese brought to that film. So yeah, for me, it's all perception.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, in Wolf of Wall Street, I mean, you literally have Wall Street, and then you have, again, everything Scorsese's done before. I mean, it's the same formula as Goodfellas, Casino, etc. And then you can even go back to Citizen Kane and films before that, too, of megalomania that just spins out. It's a very good point. Same with Matrix, but that's where I can get you, I think, because like if we're getting you with a knife or something. But with the Matrix, you're very, very right that World on a Wire did that first. Would that mean that World on a Wire is original? Obviously, World on a Wire is well over 40 years old now. There you have computer technology. It's a simulated world where everyone thinks it's real. You even have a Mr. Smith-like moment too, where a character actively tries to get out. Do you think that that movie is original?
I'd say that I would probably perceive it as being original because I haven't seen anything like it beforehand, or I can't think of any earlier examples. But there would have to be earlier examples because Fassbinder wouldn't have just come up with that film out of nowhere. He would have taken it from a source novel or taken it from something else that he's seen.
Yeah, I just looked it up. Yeah, I should have looked it up before. So it's based on a novel from 1964.
Yeah, so I mean, that's my whole idea about influence. Everything is influenced by something else. So there's definitely films that I would perceive as being original. I did actually come up with an example when we get to it later of narrative cinema, which to me seems quite original. But for me, yeah, it's all about perception. And I guess maybe that's what people are looking for. People are looking for things that they can perceive as being original rather than originality itself.
Yeah, almost got you there. So yeah, the book is called Simulacron 3, or also published as The Counterfeit World. I wonder if that was original. That's a very different episode, and damn it. I got you to say, well, I would see that as original at least also. I'll take that as a very, very small win. In these cases, a lot of people, and me included sometimes, we see something that we perceive as original, but then suddenly we see what it was inspired by. Are you guys people who will rate something higher if you perceive it to be original? And if so, if you suddenly see something that they clearly ripped off, how do you react to that? Does your rating go down, your appreciation of the film that clearly copied it, like, does that go down? An example would again be The Matrix and Dark City and World on a Wire.
For me, I think it depends. If you find out that there is an original and it has done it better than what copied it, then yes, then probably the rating goes down a little. But I don't know if it's originality that's the main point there. It's just that you found something that has done something similar, it did it better. And then, yeah, you kind of adapt your rating to that because it becomes less special. For the Matrix example, because when people talk about the Matrix and influences there, Dark City is one you mentioned, and then the 60s film, I believe. For me, the Matrix, it was really a knockoff of bad Hong Kong action and like Japanese settings from animes. I didn't really care about the philosophy or the story behind it. It was more the vibe that felt like a bad homage to things that I thought were better. Similar thing maybe with like the Blair Witch Project and the thing you mentioned about the critical mass and things that kickstart the niche. It's a good film, but I think the ones that really kickstarted the genre were films like Wreck and Cloverfield. For me, it doesn't really change the rating of a film when I found out that it was inspired by something older. Just recently, I watched a Taiwanese film from the 80s that resembled House 3 Times. Similar concept with two actors playing different characters through the ages. And so you have 3 short films where they appear in every short as someone different. And they kind of like go through a similar story there. So something like that I found existed in the 80s already, but that film just wasn't as good as House film. So it didn't increase the experience of 3 times for me, because a film is so much more than just one thing that is an inspiration of another.
I'd probably come from the same viewpoint as Niels with this one. I wouldn't rate a film lower if an earlier film did the same thing. If the earlier film did the same thing better, on a re-watch of the later film, I might then mark it down. If I don't feel it's as effective, or at least knowing where the story could have gone, I'm not going to be able to erase that from my mind when we're watching the later film. So that could cause the rating to go down. But I'm not somebody who marks films down because they're not original, because that's my whole thesis of the entire episode, is that nothing is original. But I do know that back in the IMDb message board days, there were people watching Dark City and then going and lowering their rating of The Matrix, which is interesting because even though they've got the same sort of concept there, they do different things with it. And like Neil said, a lot of the action in The Matrix is, I don't know if derivative is the right word, but inspired by Hong Kong action cinema. So it is quite different to Dark City, which is more of like a meditative drama. But yeah, it's an interesting pathway because there are definitely people out there who really value perceived originality and will mark something down if there's an earlier version that did the same sort of thing.
Yeah, I can't think of an exact example at the moment, but I do think that if something is clearly derivative, I could mark it down if I see the quote-unquote more original work or the one they ripped off before. And I think it's even more common if you have seen the original first, because a lot of times, like a lot of people who watched, say, Everything Everywhere All at Once went, this is just the Matrix, it's not that special. I don't think I rated it down or anything because it resembled the Matrix, because I do think it's quite special in its own ways. But I could see that if it felt even closer to the Matrix and I hadn't seen the Matrix already, that could theoretically have happened. And there are films like you think, oh wow, this is just a complete rip-off of XYZ. I mean, Brian De Palma did part of his career ripping off Hitchcock. You're sitting there saying, oh, this is pretty much just this. It doesn't feel that special to me anymore. I really like Body Double. I really like Dress to Kill, Sisters, Blowout. Actually, I think all four are great films. But especially in Dress to Kill, you know, it's kind of just a replica of parts of Vertigo. Actually, the same in Phoenix. Phoenix is also clearly a replica of Vertigo. Well, Phoenix is actually a favorite of mine. This is the film by Christian Petzold. That probably did bring it down a small notch for me. It's not huge, but a small notch, just how similar it felt to Vertigo. And that's been the case with a few Petzold films because it's one of those directors who just clearly take inspiration from other films. It doesn't have to bother me. Mulholland Drive is clearly Vertigo as well, and I actually like Mulholland Drive even more than Vertigo. I'm not sure if that's blasphemy or not. Yes, Sol is writing in the chat. Everything's Vertigo. I mean, Decision to Leave is Vertigo. So many things is bloody Vertigo. But so sometimes it's not an issue. It just depends how derivative it can feel. And I think at that point in the episode, I think we just need to go back to my intro here and try to pick out some originality. Like, I guess it can be mostly me and Niels. Let's try to put ourselves on hard mode first. Like, Niels, are there any films from the last 5-10 years that you think were truly original, or at least, what's the most original film you've seen from the last decade?
For me, it's like an impossible question to answer, because when it's about a combination of elements, then there are so many different ways in which a film can be original. I mean, just last week or 2 weeks ago, I watched Dream on Fire. It's by a Canadian director working in Japan. The premise is very simple. It's basically a dance film like Step Up, something very generic and very basic. Then the way he handled it, or the way he approached it, was like, it's like really a trip to the nightlife of Tokyo. So he kind of subverts those dance movie specifics. It's not like if you follow your dreams, you'll become successful. It's not like, let's do some hip hop here, but let's make it basic hip hop that, you know, the broader audience can appreciate, because we don't want to put people away. He goes into nightlife scenes that are pretty obscure, pretty weird for people. And then all that combined with a little drama on the side, it becomes this very unique film, this very original film, something that I hadn't seen before done that way. So most of the films I like, I have a similar story, and there's not really one that jumps out specifically, because I'm like Saul. When I see something, I always kind of find these references. Even one of the most original films I think I've seen in 2024 was Poor Things. But even when you look at Poor Things, it's like Frankenstein. You have early Genet and Caro influences there in the visuals. And you make all these connections with other films, but then just combining those and making these unlikely combinations, that's where it becomes truly original for me. So I don't really have one film or one title I can name and then say, you just watch this and it will be original to you too, because it's just aspects of films that are new or fresh or exciting for me. So also maybe one thing that I'd like to add is that the more films you watch, the more easier it becomes to make those connections. And you know, when people start out as cinephiles, almost every new film or every recommendation they get, there's something new in them for them, because they really haven't seen it before, simply because they haven't seen all those references before. The more films you watch, and definitely when you go above 10,000 films, there's always parts of a film that look familiar, sound familiar, or makes you think of this or that. So it's also the more films you see, the less or the harder it becomes to find something truly original. Only then the combination of elements again makes it very original, like Poor Things. For me, Poor Things, watching it, it's like watching 20 references at once, but having those many references and having them contradict each other in several ways, it's really exciting and original.
Poor Things is a really interesting example, because that's a film that, to me, when I was watching it, it did feel original, because I went into it completely blank and I didn't really know much about it at all. And the way that it starts off as basically a Frankenstein story and then sort of evolves into something else was something very different to me. And I guess uniqueness is part of what I liked about it. But there are definitely influences in there, not just Frankenstein, but the whole steampunk subgenre of films. So there's a lot of influences in there, so I wouldn't say it's completely original, but it's definitely one of those, I guess, perceived original films. When I was watching, I was going, this really feels original. This really feels like something that I haven't seen before. A film from the last 10 years that I'd say is completely original, it's a bit of a struggle for me.
Or just somewhat the original salt, just somewhat.
Oh, right, okay. So somewhat original. I want to go with Unfriended because we're in 2024, so I guess it's just cusping our 10 years old. But the whole idea of Unfriended and everything being shot as entirely what's on the screen, that to me was something which definitely felt very fresh and different. I mean, since then I have seen films like The Den, which is a bit of a precursor to Unfriended. But as far as I know, Unfriended is the first one where everything is the computer screen and you don't see any other shots that aren't the computer screen. So that to me felt very fresh and it felt very original. It possibly isn't because it's inspired by different other things, but it's definitely a film for the last 10 years, which I'd say definitely felt quite original while I was watching it. And while I've rewatched it also, because I've rewatched it, I think I've seen it 2 or 3 times now. It definitely feels very fresh whenever I go into it.
Yeah, Unfriended is definitely one of those films that are very, very original. I mean, I don't actually like Unfriended at all, but I can definitely concede that it is original work. It's one of those more or less objective cases where, yes, it's clearly a subgenre of found footage. It's clearly building on this idea of found footage films where it's all from security cameras. Paranormal Activity. You have a film completely from security cameras. Those kind of ideas are unique, they're special, and then obviously they take on. And those films have existed. They're not truly original in the sense that they're building on found footage tropes, etc. But in terms of original storytelling, original ways of telling a story, you just can't argue it wasn't done before, or at least not to that extent. And yeah, that's really exciting to see that those still exist. And yes, Unfriended 2014, probably released after February when we're recording this. So yeah, 10 years ago. I don't think I can think of any film I would consider truly original, because I don't really think that ever really exists either. But there are actually several films from this year, even, or last year now, 2023, that I thought were original. And it's always right that he converted me, but that was always my view as well. I don't think there's anything that can be completely, utterly 100% original, but I think that there are works that can bring in original ideas. One of the most beautiful, wonderful contradictions here from last year was Orlando, my political biography, which I'm sure we'll talk about more when we talk about our favorites from 2023, which is an upcoming episode. Stay tuned. In that film, you have the character of Orlando from the novel of Virginia Woolf, played by multiple different trans and non-binary actors, partially playing themselves, partially playing their character. And that's never been done before. And it's a commentary on the life experiences of trans non-binary people seen through this novel. So part of it's completely quote-unquote unoriginal because it's an adaptation of the novel, sometimes word for word. They're playing out the thing. Stylistically, it's not original because it clearly references Godard and Brechtian cinema. I've seen all of that before, but that one element there was truly original to me. It's only saying that it sounds like palindromes.
Yeah, palindromes. It's a film which Todd Solondz did, and he's got the same character, and throughout various different scenes, she's played by different actresses. And that even was completely original because at the time that was compared to that Obscure Object of Desire, but Obscure Object only had two actresses, whereas Palindromes had a variety of different actresses of different can't pronounce that.
Ethnicities. No, I get it. Yeah. No, this is not quite the same. But yes, no, I see your point. There are lots of other films where you have multiple actors playing the same character. I mean, you have I'm Not Here as well by Todd Haynes, Bob Dylan, where it's played by many different actors and even an actress of different ages, ethnicities, and so on. But in this case, what's special about Orlando is that they kind of flip in and out of the characters, so they're also themselves, and it kind of just tells the story of essentially being trans and non-binary through the lens of Orlando, where you have them interviewed as Orlando, and then they suddenly talk about their own life, suddenly they talk as if they were the character, these kind of things. It's not something that I've seen before. But again, yeah, you have regardless of which aspect you're looking at, you have something that reminds you of something else. I mean, one that I aired to Niels before this episode was River, which is not a bit of a contradiction because the director of River did Beyond the Infinite 2 Minutes a couple of years ago, which was about a 2-minute time loop where you get a recording from the future, it's 2 minutes ahead, and you kind of see it. And he kind of replicated that idea with, we're going to do something again that's 2 minutes and it's time based. But this time it's the time loop tropes they're playing with, and it's a time loop that only lasts 2 minutes, and it has a couple of really inspired things there. First one is that length, and the second one is that everyone is in the time loop. It's not just one or two characters that's interacting with people who are living the same day. Every single person in the film is in the same time loop, and they always get brought back to their starting point. So from every time they restart, they have to run back to continue their conversation, continue their action, to resolve it. There's many elements there that are not that original. Some parts of it that are written, a bit flimsily. But I just thought that idea of everyone's in the time loop and it resets every 2 minutes, that's never been done before. And that's pretty damn original to me. But if I recall correctly, you didn't think so, Niels.
I think for me, it all comes down to, one word, which is granularity. How abstract do you want a concept to be original? I think when Saul was talking about Unfriended, the original aspect there was computer screens. And indeed, because computer screen is something relatively novel. But then, like you said, Chris, there's also films that only work with camera footage. And then the question is camera footage the same thing as a computer? Is it differentiating enough to be called original? For me, River was not really original because the director made that other film. What's the title?
Beyond the Infinite 2 Minutes.
The concept is very similar. It's just like a twist on the same concept. It felt like one of those one-hit wonders, those music singles who make a second or trying to make a second hit. Basically the same samples and the same structure of the song, only with some slight variations on it. So I kind of expected that movie from him. Well, it ties into the expectations I had of the film. And there are some original aspects, I think. There are probably other films too. I think Beautiful Dreamer, Oshi's anime from Urusei Yatsura, I think as several people in the same time loop too. But yeah, I do get where you're coming from. There are elements in River that are new and fresh and that haven't been done like that before. But I was kind of expecting something in the same vein, and that's what I got, and that's why it didn't feel truly surprising or original to me.
Yeah, and I agree there too. And I think that's also this kind of problem with the idea of originality, that you can do something original or partially original, and it's still not that surprising because you expect that from the director. It's again, large part of it is similar to something else. Another film I actually thought was relatively original in the same contradictory sense from just last year as well. It was Dream Scenario, where you had relatively original concept that a guy is just randomly in other people's dreams for no apparent reason, and then that dream starts to change. That's not an idea I have seen before. It's possible it's been done before. I haven't seen it. But at the same time, the tone and atmosphere and how Nicolas Cage plays a central character, it's very similar to adaptation. Here you have a film that, in terms of viewing experience watching it, is very similar to some things you have seen before. It really isn't that different from the works of Kaufman. But it's obviously a different director, Christopher Barkley, etc. But it has that an original concept. That also ties in with your granular idea, Niels, that there is this spectrum of originality, and like, yes, the concept can be relatively original, but at the same time, like, everything else about it can be familiar.
I've been looking at some of my favorites here from the past 10 years, and there is one film, I think it's called Swiss Army Man. It starts with a scene where two guys are stuck on an island. One of the guys is a corpse. And the way they escape from the island is one guy uses the farting corpse to escape the island. I challenge you guys to find a film that is similar to that in terms of plot.
Castaway?
Damn it, Saul.
Good one. Very good one.
I can't really think of anything. But again, it's a specificity. But no, that's a unique concept. I mean, I'm sure you can talk about films it resembles in terms of style. It's a bit mixture of childish and craziness. So maybe Hausu from the 70s, for instance. But I mean, in terms of concept, that's pretty damn unique. That's a very, very unique concept.
The use of corpses in films isn't that unique in itself, though. Although I guess the way that he's trying to use in the film may be, but everything from Weekend at Bernie's to names escape me at the moment, but the idea of corpses being used in films, that has been done, but it hasn't really been done with the Castaway twist before.
But it's not like he's pretending the corpse is... He's not fooling anyone else. It's just him and the corpse, and he's using the corpse as a vehicle. So and Neil says, don't forget about the farting. Very important, he says.
I think just one more film, and that's Aronofsky's Mother. I think the concept there was pretty original. It's kind of surreal. It's real setting. It's a house that exists in itself. It also has spoilers. Maybe we can edit that out, but it's based on the Bible.
Well, I think everyone knows by now. But yes, I mean, I would actually agree. I created a bit of a short list of films I thought from the last 10 years that I thought were pretty original, and that one was on it. It's one of the clearest example of relatively original. Obviously, it's based on something else. We don't have to say what exactly it's based on, but oh damn it, yeah, so reminded us that Mother is basically Uterus BA 2037, which I'll agree with, so I'll take that back. But it has a different twist on it. I mean, the plot is different, but Mother is essentially a repulsion to, I guess, SHE, the Chinese animation film about shoes and the oppression of female shoes in this kind of weird world was pretty original, but that's also very, very similar in style to Svankmajer. You had Spring Breakers, maybe that was a bit original. You could maybe say Tree of Life. And honestly, a lot of the things that Quentin Dupieux has done, I mean, I know that, I mean, it's gimmicks quite often, but like, it's past 10 or even close to 20 years now with Rubber, where everyone gets killed by a wheel. I mean, you had movies where people get killed by cars, so it's not that out there. Mandibulus, maybe, where you have that little fly and they're trading it, and it's a stoner comedy. That's a bit original. But no, like Saul said, there's nothing that is truly, truly, truly original. The documentary Taming the Garden was pretty original. A lot of people shown that film to didn't care for it that much. Largely non-verbal film, where Souls writing Taming the Garden was just boring, and I get that. But it's a film where it essentially does look at the transportation of trees. I mean, there's some dialogue in there, but not much, and it's just for the collection of the richest guy in Georgia, if I remember correctly, who's building an artificial garden, and they're just showing these really weird, dreamlike pictures of huge trees being transported on boats and trucks, and building an entire road just for transporting the trees. I mean, it's a unique story, and it's shot in a relatively unique way, but most people find it boring. Original doesn't have to be good, I guess. One of the film I actually thought was somewhat original in tone and messaging, though it's probably not, was Unrest. Well, that's actually pretty similar to the first film by the same director in terms of tone. So it's not, even that is not that original, but there you have like essentially a film about class struggle. You have a film about Pyotr Kropotkin, the famed anarchist, and you have this kind of this tone that's just really serene. You have this tone of harmony while workers get fired for anarchist activity, etc. Police people are polite as they turn people away from the voting booths. Everything seems very organized and it's burning below. I mean, I'm sure there's something else like that. It also has a relatively different visual style where in a lot of cases you just see a part of the ground, for instance. I'm sure that's been done several times before as well. And so is typing, geez, all of the original ones are just boring, and saying the visuals are woefully inconsistent too, which some people can argue that, yeah. But maybe that's the original. Do you guys have anything else you want to bring up from the last decade?
Well, the only other one I could think of was a Spanish film called Pieles or Skins. It starts with a scene of a girl who is being kicked off of Instagram because she took a selfie. And the reason is because her anus and her mouth are switched around. So it was an improper photo, and then so also it's about very different characters living in a very special world. The overarching concept isn't that weird, but the different stories are pretty damn freaky.
So it seems like none of us were able to point out something that were absolutely original, but large amounts of films that have something original to them at least. Do we want to also argue about older films? I mean, what's what's the most original film you have ever seen, regardless of year? Like, are there some films like Sol mentioned a couple earlier in experimental world that he thought were actually pretty original? Like, what are the most quote unquote original films of all time? Are we going to have to go back to Lumiere brothers and Georges Méliès, or let's see? Like, I'll give you the floor first, Sol, actually, because you had some already.
I was debating this question for quite a while. We've been playing this podcast for a few weeks now. And in terms of narrative cinema, because that's the hardest one to get something original for, the most original one that I can actually think of is, interestingly enough, a sequel, but it's what the sequel does.
Wow.
Yeah, it's what the sequel does, which is actually so original. So the film is Back to the Future Part 2. And the original thing about it is the way that it actually takes the exact footage from the original film, but replays it from different angles. So you actually see the footage from the first Back to the Future has been edited into the second one, but then they've added in extra reaction shots. You're sort of seeing characters in the background. And some of it, you've sort of got like the two Michael J. Foxes passing each other, which must have been done by some really super cool green screening or something else to that effect. But just that whole idea of reusing footage from the original and then inserting your actors into that footage. I mean, it's been done since in films like Terminator Genesis, but I actually can't think of a single film from before 1989 that actually did what Back to the Future Part 2 did.
Yeah, I'm sitting here racking my brain, actually, because it's kind of, you have to be a sequel. I mean, obviously there's films that recut old footage and reused it. I mean, if you want to be really pedantic about it, I mean, Alain Robert-Grillet remixed his film Eden After into And Took the Dice. But that's just a remix film. So you add some new footage into the old footage, but it's a completely different thing. So now I can't think of a film where you kind of replay the previous one as a sequel. That's a great example, Sol. Wow. Does kind of play into what we're talking about with River and a few other films too, though, where it's kind of like, oh, here's one element that's unique within the full film. But still, it's very impressive.
Thanks. I'm glad I managed to come up with something original for the originality.
What about you, Niels? What would you consider the most original films of all time?
I really have no idea, because I've been looking through my list of favorites, films I love, and there's always like parts that are original. I always can find counterexamples too. I mean, even in Saul's example, it's a very technical, very specific. For me, it kind of immediately reminded of Rashomon, where you just get different versions of the same story, and each new version adds to that story. So taking the bigger concept there, it's like a variation on that, a technical variation maybe, but it's still a variation. Looking at my favorites, I find things that are really original in certain of these films. One of them is a Taiwanese film called Honey Poo Poo. It's a very different take on a narrative structure. It kind of works like how we search the internet, because it is about the internet and how people living today and how things are connected, how concepts are connected. So the structure of the film kind of takes that idea, not talk about one theme specifically, but talk about a theme and its connected elements. Some are closely connected, some are more tangibly connected. But yeah, no really specific titles there for me.
Yeah, it's difficult, isn't it? I thought about a few different films. I mean, I'd love to throw in Last Year at Marienbad, just because it's kind of like the first film, and it's very few copycats, really. That's kind of, you don't know fully what it's about. You don't fully have the narrative. There's so many different interpretations. You can see it in so many different ways. But obviously, it's kind of like this weird early fusion of avant-garde and popular cinema, and I don't think that really existed before. One more mainstream film I thought about, you guys might disagree, was Albert Brooks's Real Life from 1979, which is about a film crew that sets out to record a year in the life of an average family. But it's kind of like a joke on reality TV shows before reality TV shows existed. And it's about how these guys want to first capture real life, but then they kind of want to make it more explosive. They want to change up the narratives. So it's a parody of reality, again, a parody of reality TV shows before reality TV shows really existed at all. And it feels on point, almost, like well over 40 years later. It's 45 years old now, that movie. So that's a film that managed to, be before its time in some ways, and it's a very mainstream film, and that's just very impressive. That's something that's just come out of Hollywood that manages to have that kind of originality. So I'm saying it's a bit like a married couple turned into a comedy, and yeah, that's kind of the case too. So like nothing is original. Like you obviously have documentaries before then that tries to be about normal people, and this is a comedy about that reality. So yeah, sure, it's a reaction, I suppose, as well. But it's the first proper spoof of this idea of people trying to document reality, and I thought that was pretty damn original, to be honest with you. And I guess I can throw in I Am Negro too, just because that's the film that really, I mean, the jump cuts kind of existed before, but that's the first film that just shot a sequence and that's cut out specific parts of that scene so that you kind of see it in fragments. From everything I read, that's the first one to really do that way. Then Breathless replicated it, and today that's essentially the norm for YouTube. So that film is from 1958, I think. Now it's really entered the mainstream in every single way. So in the same way that Saul shouted out Back to the Future 2, I'll shout out I Am Negro for inventing something that's now commonly used. Are there any other really original films from the history of cinema that you'd like to shout out?
Arrival of the Train.
All right. That might be the most original place we can end this episode. I'm sure there will be people listening to this episode. They will be like, I don't know, shouting Persona or shouting like, you talked about Michael Snow, why didn't any of you mention Wavelength? Or there's so many other films that could have been shouted out as original in this episode. I mean, I'm sure some people will shout out Citizen Kane on loop, but honestly, every single thing in Citizen Kane had been done in one way or another. Like the shots had been done before by Ford. It was more of a compilation. I'm sure there's people who will be shouting out so many films at us. So if you have those films you want to shout out, be it 8.5, be it John Dielman, which I did mention earlier, be it Exterminating Angel, or any experimental film you can think of, come to icmforum.com and write us a comment. Like, how the hell did you forget to mention X, Y, C? Let us know. Maybe there'll be a sequel. Maybe you'll be in it. And maybe we'll remake ourselves. Because, as Saul mentioned at the start of this episode, nothing is original. Even we here at Talking Images, as we're now in our 5th season, might just be running out of ideas. So, thank you so much for listening, and join us again soon.
You have been listening to Talking Images, the official podcast of icmforum.com.